Edward, what kind of intelligence agencies do we have that had no idea whether or not Kim Jong-un was alive or dead these last 2 weeks? That's a very relevant question, Edward. What kind of intelligence agencies we have? I don't know. Do they know more than they let us know? That's also a possibility, which I will not rule out. Maybe, and I hate to bring the theory of cooperation or secret cooperation between countries, but maybe he passed, and the Koreans asked the United States and other governments not to publicize it while they go through the process of appointing a successor to Kim. I have absolutely no, this is just a crazy supposition. I have absolutely no idea. If the intelligence agencies do not know, but more than the American intelligence agencies, I'm surprised that the South Korean intelligence agencies, which are extremely active in North Korea, as active as they can be, have not come up, have been extremely discreet about what's going on there. So I cannot answer your question. I don't know whether he's alive or not. That being said, there have been already instances in which Kim had disappeared, as you know, in previous years for 6 or 7 weeks, fueling this kind of suppositions again, that of a coup in North Korea or an illness. And then he reappeared a few weeks later as nothing happened. So, and there were no explanations by the North Korean authorities as to why he had disappeared for 5 or 6 weeks. So we'll have to wait a little longer to see if something happened to him, and mostly who replaced him. Because unlike his father and his grandfather, I don't think he has children to put in place, and he was only 36. So I assume that even if he does have children, must be very young. So that there might be a problem with appointing a successor in North Korea. From Josie, remember Robert Frost's poem asking if the world will end in fire or ice? No, I don't, but you do, obviously. And probably this poem is better known to some of the people here attending the meeting. Would Italy be better off economically if they left the European Union? Well, this is a question that the Italians are asking themselves now for 2 or 3 years, since the populist party won the elections there 3 years ago. In the meantime, as you might know, the populist party lost the latest parliamentary elections. They have a socialist government again, but the populist movement, and particularly the Italian former Italian Interior Minister Salvini, is still extremely popular in Italy. So this question has been raised several times. I think that for the time being, the Italians believe, the Italians, I don't know about the Italian public opinion per se, but the Italian official position is that they're better off in the European Union for the time being. They're getting more out of the European opinion subsidies, in terms of subsidies, than they are putting in. But at some point, that will come to the fore and be asked probably in the form of a referendum at some point, and not for now, obviously. From Mark, any comments regarding North Korea's possible change in leadership? I don't have anything else to mention, Mark, that what I said earlier to Edward. I have no idea if there was a change in leadership or there will be a change in leadership. All I can do is speculate that could be a change in leadership. Now, if we're going to speculate, my belief is that the army will have the most important role, obviously, because in North Korea, there is no such a thing as public opinion, obviously. There is no such a thing as political parties. There are no democratic institutions. So basically, like in the Soviet Union in those good old days, the new successor will be picked by a small committee, and I believe that it will be made up mostly of military people who hold the power in North Korea. So that might rule out any possible softening of the North Korean positions vis-à-vis the nuclear bomb or vis-à-vis the United States, at least initially. Then it has to be seen how this will evolve. But for now, if there is a change, and if in effect Kim Jong-un has passed, I don't expect huge changes from one day to next in North Korea. They will be implemented gradually, probably. And I guess also China will have something to say about the change in Pyongyang. From Peggy, can this lack of global cooperation be partly the fault of a weak United Nations? Again, the temptation to blame the United Nations for the lack of global cooperation, obviously, is there. But again, as I have said many times before, Peggy, what is the United Nations? United Nations is 193 nations of the so-called international community. If these countries amongst themselves, even bilaterally, cannot find a way, in the case of the European Union, the 27 of them, in the case of of North America, the three neighbors, in the case of South America, all the rest of the regional organization are not capable of fighting together, or at least coordinating or harmonizing their politics in terms of confronting a common threat, which is a huge global medical threat. What can the United Nations do differently from what separate nations are not willing to do? To that, I have no answer. The UN cannot do more than some of its parts, which is basically the 193 countries forming the United Nations. And if they are unwilling to cooperate amongst themselves, how can you expect them to cooperate within the United Nations. You see that with the World Health Organization. That's the best example. From owner here, private, your reference to life after World War I, what were you referencing regarding world order, isolationism, etc.? I was not alive then, neither was I, assure you. I'm old, but not that old. And forget my school lessons. Yeah, basically, well, you know what happened after World War I. Basically, every country not only fended for itself, but also was trying to get revenge from the outcome of the World War country, particularly Germany. And then came the Great Recession, which also isolated a little more the United States from the rest of the world. The United States concerning itself, obviously, with the economic issues at home. You might, or even though you're not born, but you might have read in the history books how difficult it was for Roosevelt to get the United States into the World War, because at the time isolationism was prevalent in the American public opinion, and a lot of people, despite everything that was, and it was known perfectly well here what was happening in Europe after 1938, 1939, and in 1940 and beyond. The US at some point even hesitated to help out the UK when they were being bombed by the Germans. So yes, that's what I was referring to the world chaos or disorder that led to the Second World War, that led to, if you remember also, after the First World War, the League of Nations was created, which is a predecessor to the United Nations. And that didn't seem to have worked out very well. So yes, that's what I was basically referring to. From another phone, after the earthquake in Haiti, Clinton said that redevelopment dollars would change the country for the better. Throwing dollars at Haiti changed nothing. How can the world avoid a repeat of this with the COVID rescue dollars? Laurie. If nothing else, I believe that this global pandemic is somewhat different in nature from the earthquake. Probably you refer to the earthquake in Haiti, which has traditionally very corrupt government, and where there was no oversight over the money that the United States and the United Nations, in this particular case, did send to Haiti. In this particular case, in this case with the outbreak, we are dealing with a global issue that affects everybody. So I would believe that the money that is invested in this rescue, medical rescue, will be probably more efficient. Number one, because this money is not given to an international, a global response. Every country is trying to deal with its own issues. So I guess that even the countries are, the governments, national governments, have an incentive here to be more efficient and as quickly as possible when it comes to finding some kind of cure or some kind of treatment for the vaccine for their own population, if nothing else, before concerning themselves with the rest of the world. Whereas in the case of Haiti, you had the United States and the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere being given money with no oversight. So it seems to me that at this time, considering the nature of the threat, the assistance probably will be more effective in this particular case. Since it affects nationally and the government's own people. From Alan, have you heard anything about the fighting between Russia and Ukraine? Do you have any information about this? No, I have not. I know that before the outbreak, there was some movement there. When I say movement, unfortunately, not the diplomatic. As you know, Zelensky and Putin met in January to work out some kind of ceasefire. I don't call that a ceasefire, but a truce on the border, with Zelensky showing a little more flexibility towards Putin than Petrochenko, his predecessor. But that all disappeared, I guess, in this in the present outbreak. So I do not believe that there have been any changes there. Definitely not a resumption of fighting at this time. Everybody is busy with something else. Richard, do you think the US, okay, the question wasn't finished, completed. I took Trump's advice and ended up in the hospital after I injected myself and gargled with Lysol. My condition was critical, but the medical staff gave me a Clorox 4 drip and I'm now on the mend. That's good to hear. They plan to continue my treatment tomorrow by force feeding me a sun lamp. Well, I hope your treatment will be very efficient and everything will go well. I don't have a name here. It's just from term to everyone. And I hope your treatment will go well. But in terms of foreign policy, I don't know exactly how it affects our discussion, but I wish you best of luck. From Richard, do you think the US will reassert leadership if the Democrats win in November? I think I partly answered this question. Reassert world global leadership like before, I do not believe so. Again, for the reasons that I mentioned to you before. Whether you have a Democrat leadership in the White House or in the Senate or in the House, I think that the trend today is more to look inward than abroad. And once again, that has started actually with a Democrat in the White House, who himself, even though Obama did not actually publicly advocated a withdrawal of the American influence in the world, it did take steps actually in that direction. So even diplomatically speaking, there was definitely a withdrawal, a gradual withdrawal of the United States for different reasons. The Obama and the Democrats believe that the US shouldn't be dictating to other countries their behavior, and those countries should be left alone to decide their own path. Whereas Trump is definitely more of a transactional nature, where the US will gain mostly from dealing with, and will go stronger, dealing with its own issues, and will only deal, I'm oversimplifying, but that's the nature of the message, and would only deal with foreign countries, foes or friends, based on a transactional, on transactional terms. In other words, if I can get out of you more than I put in, then we, or on equal basis, then we can deal together, whether foes or friends. So I do not believe that there will be a total change in terms of dealing with the outside world. From Rick, the virus demonstrates that a coordinated global response would have been much more effective than a fragmented nation by nation, or as in the US, state by state response. Therefore, isn't it likely that the lesson that will eventually be learned by the nations of this world is that increased, not decreased, global coordination is essential for the preservation of the species and life as we know it? What is the likelihood that this more optimistic result would occur? To answer your second question first, you know that I don't like optimistic replies, so not in this class. No, I just believe that once we get over this pandemic, and unfortunately, again, I still believe that each country will fend for itself for a little while, because obviously the economic hit is such that free trade and cooperation with the outside world will not be a priority initially. How this is going to develop later, I don't know, but I'm afraid that the lesson learned from this crisis will, on the contrary, be closing borders, because opening borders means admitting people from and increasing the danger of the type of pandemics that, or infectious diseases, or economic financial burden, money spent on immigrants or refugees would be better spent on domestic issues. So I do not believe that initially anyway, we can argue over what initially means, how many years or how many months or how many, I believe it will take a while. So I do not believe that we'll have this kind of reaction stronger cooperation today than we did before the pandemic. No. My belief is that, I might be wrong and we'll see. My belief is that, on the contrary, the trend will be towards more national response and to closing down the borders as opposed to opening it up to the rest of the world. And there will be less globalization, or the emphasis will be less on globalization than up to now. Actually, even up to now, the past few years that you can see in many instances in the world, we saw them, both in Europe, in the Americas, everywhere. The trend has been questioning increasingly the process of globalization, with people wondering, more and more voices arguing that globalization has not been good to large segments of the population who have been left behind. From James, the destruction of World War II left Europe vulnerable to famine. The Marshall Plan's huge financial loans led to the modern Europe we come to know until the present day. How can America provide such leadership given its own financial deficit it now faces? Well, by helping these countries once the US comes up with, and most likely considering the advances, medical advances that the US has compared to the rest of the world, by helping the other countries, probably when the US comes up with a treatment for the virus, helping them to get over it. But in the beginning, and definitely if the Republican Party wins the November elections, there will not be the kind of Marshall Plan that was put in place after World War II. That wouldn't have been even without the pandemic. I don't believe that the US has any taste for playing the role of leadership in Europe right now. Not in NATO, not in Europe, not any other place. From Peggy again, can the nations elect to cede their individual power to a UN leadership? They could, but they do not want to. There is not one country which would vote by referendum to give up their individual power to a UN leadership. And even those who did to some extent, countries not to the UN, but to the European Union, for instance, some of them are regretting it today. So I don't think, definitely the trend is not to giving up more power to a supranational agency or organization. On the contrary, I think that most countries will be trying to get back their power to decide within their own borders. From Mark, can the United Nations be reorganized to coordinate a global strategy? Good luck to reorganize the United Nations. Maybe more transparency would be one aspect of I guess, this strategy. Well, do not forget one thing, that the Charter of the United Nations, which is the Bible of the United Nations, um, uh, more and foremost, actually foremost, respects the individual sovereignty of each state. Had not been this individual sovereignty of each state to decide back home what to do and how to rule their own countries, no country would have joined the United Nations in the first place. They have agreed, the countries which have joined the United Nations, they have agreed to coordinate their efforts to maintain peace after World War II. And they gave some of this power, delegate some of this power to the Security Council, which is formed, as you know, of 15 members, five of which the major powers have permanent seats and have the right of veto. But for the countries to coordinate, maybe, and but to give more power to the United Nations, it's very unlikely. From Andrew, why did Netanyahu not implement the Oslo Accords? Well, it's not, Netanyahu came well after the Oslo Accords. Actually, there had been discussions about Oslo Accords immediately after, if you remember, Rabin was assassinated. And if you also remember Prime Minister Sharon and the Prime Minister, his name is just, who was indicted also, the former mayor of Olmert, discussed with the Palestinians the terms of the Oslo Accord. But Arafat never got to the point of signing the deal. They came very close to signing a deal, not with Rabin, but with his successors as prime ministers. But that never came to anything. So it's not Netanyahu's. Netanyahu continued negotiation with the Palestinian side up to 2012, throughout the two uprisings in the Palestinian territories, the two intifadas, late 20th century, early 2000, and then a little bit, a few years later, but nothing came out of it. What factors lead to less nationalism and more global cooperation? If I had an answer to this question, I would say the major and only factor would be political will. But again, political will, it's a very general term. And again, it's open to interpretation. Every country will tell you that has a very strong political will to cooperate more, until you go into more details and ask them how this cooperation and on what terms this cooperation should take place. And that's when you get the opposite positions. From Josie, how can I mail you the poem by Frost called Fire? And why you just, you email me. And if you don't have my email, I give you my email. I give my email to everybody here. It's P Fabian in one word, P Fabian like Pierre, P Fabian 01 at gmail.com. By the way, I take only flattering comments about our meetings and not criticism right now. Wait a second, you're trying to talk to me.
I said, thank you. I will email it, the poem. The Robert Frost poem. I will send it.
Okay, thank you. From Larry. Don't you think globalization will return once the American public needs to pay so much more for American-made goods? That's a very valid question, actually. It is obvious that if there is less trade, free trade between countries, as a result, most likely the American consumers will be paying more for the goods that they buy and which are made in other in developed countries around the world. And sometimes very conveniently, the American authorities, which are criticizing the dependence today on the Chinese goods and ingredients and a number of items which are strategic, very conveniently forget that 10, 15, 20 years ago, there was a rush by American corporations and companies and factories to open factories in Asia and other parts of the world, including China, where they can make items and goods which are much less expensive than in the United States, though their profits were much higher. And also the consumers, the American consumer, are obviously happier because he had to pay less for those goods as opposed to those made in the United States. And that is true for every developed country, which delocalized their industries to Asia and other parts of the world where main power was cheaper. That's a very valid question, and it's a possibility that then the American consumers would put pressure on the government to start again. This is not a decision made by the government. These are decisions in the capitalistic society, decisions made by private companies to delocalize. So it remains to be seen if this trend will continue, or to be fair to Trump, since he became president or during the presidential campaign, he denounced this trend and asked the American companies to come back home and to create jobs in this country. I don't know how successful he was. In a few instances, there were a few factories, important ones that came back from Mexico and other parts of the world to produce goods back here, but not too many. So it remains to be seen how much of an impact the instructions given by the government to private companies will have. We'll see. What is the role of WHO? Has the organization at this point been marginalized, or are they still taking actions? we heard about their missteps, but what have they been doing to address the pandemic that has been helpful? Well, what have they done? Really, it's a bit, there is a misconception of WHO in terms of how much the agency can do. It's an international organization, and like every international organization, as I mentioned it last week, actually, it's a political organization. So again, you have the interest of every member states of doing or not doing things, or letting the WHO take initiative when it's not convenient for a government. The best example was China, which WHO found out about the epidemics in China apparently late December, early January, and they haven't done anything about it. They didn't advertise it at all, and they didn't put it in the press until February. And even then, again, as I mentioned last week, even then, they urged countries not to take measures which would isolate China from the rest of the world, and criticize the US government for overreacting when the administration closed its border to Chinese citizens. So even saying that isolating a country was counterproductive. It only decreed a global pandemic in March, 11th of March, if I remember well. So it took them time to react. Now, they cannot themselves make a product. I mean, they are not set up like a pharmaceutical company or a laboratory to make products. All they can do is, like in the case of the Ebola, they have to ask every government, for instance, when Ebola broke out, the experts on infectious diseases from the World Health Organization had to ask rather permission from the government of the Republic of the Congo to go into the country and see what was going on in that region, in the Goma region in the Congo. And only then, when they had these samples analyzed, not by themselves, but they give them out to be analyzed, did they come to the conclusion that that was something very serious. And they declared a world pandemic when as Ebola started to spread. It was same thing with the coronavirus. WHO, from the beginning, I must say, asked the Chinese government to grant permission to a group of the experts to go into China, to Wuhan and the Hubei region province, and see what was going on. At the beginning, the Chinese authorities turned down the WHO, saying it's nothing, we can deal with it, it's not such a big deal, and it cannot be transmitted person to person, which WHO repeated publicly, that the virus could not be transmitted person to person for 3 or 4 weeks. It's only after a month when probably the Chinese local authorities also realized that this is something serious, that the Chinese government granted permission to an WHO team to come into the country and go there and check it out. But even after giving permission, it took the Chinese government another 2 weeks to actually allow this WHO team to travel to Wuhan, which by that time, obviously, it was a little bit too late. So yes, WHO is guilty of having embraced the Chinese positions at the beginning without checking. Yes, for political reason. But on the other hand, they could not gone into China and check it out without China's permission to go there. Because again, this is a UN agency, and by nature, it's a political agency. It's a political nature. So the Chinese, obviously at the beginning, did not want anybody from the outside, including the United Nations, to come there and check it out, believing that they can deal with it probably locally, and there will be no need for outside intervention, which the Chinese believed, and rightly so, would have an impact on China's credibility, actually, today. From Deborah, climate change is a greater threat than this pandemic. Do you think this epidemic will give scientists more credibility? In terms of climate change might be a greater threat than this pandemic, but this pandemic is more efficient in scaring people than climate change. Climate change is still in many minds, even today. Even as you can see, I don't know, Antarctica and Arctica, the ice melting and summers which apparently are warmer than previous one and so on. This is still very abstract in the minds of people, number one. And number two, the measures that the environmentalists advocate, some of them are so extreme as to not being believable by most people, and who would not comply with them on a daily basis. Here, this is different. In people's minds, generally speaking, climate change is something that does not necessarily kill people. Or if it does, it will be sometimes in the future. Contrary to the pandemic, which is right here, and it's called the invisible enemy, which a body count on a daily basis. So people are obviously much more willing to and much more aware of what's going on today, which is perceived as an immediate danger, much more than something which might happen in the future, which is climate change. So yes, there is credibility as far as scientists are concerned and their work, research in terms of climate change, but there is not that feel of immediacy and of emergency that this pandemic triggered. Mark, American stock market is unrealistically high. Are other world stock market also defying gravity? Will this last till a vaccine is created? Will this last, you mean the high world markets, or Well, they fluctuate from now. Unrealistically, I wouldn't call it unrealistic. It's just a question of the way you placing yourself in the future. Is it unrealistic to believe that the US economy and the other economies will rebound relatively fast after this pandemic is mastered? Is it unrealistic to believe that the jobs will come back and the economic situation will go back to not where it was necessarily, but close to it in the next 6 months or 12 months? Most people believe that probably it will. And it will regain some of the losses, probably not entirely, but it will regain some of the losses registered today. So I don't know if this is, the stock market is unrealistically high. But it's the same situation for the rest of the world. It's not only the American stock market is high, not high. It's still 6,000 to 7,000 points below what it used to be in February. So I wouldn't call it high. I would say that considering the current situation is high. How unrealistic that is, I'm not an expert, but people seem to think that the economy will rebound relatively quickly. From Thorn, I'm still baffled by how a country like the United States, with its massive resources and immense medical infrastructure, has accounted for some 56,000 deaths, almost 27% of the global death toll. Conversely, countries such as India and Brazil, with their slums and have fewer deaths. I would have anticipated the exact opposite. Well, unfortunately, you can still anticipate because, as I mentioned also last week, and I don't want to get into the medical aspect of the coronavirus. It's not my expertise. But all these countries which have shown very limited number of cases, it's because people haven't been tested. They lack the infrastructure, they lack the testing kit to do any testing on the people. So we don't know how many people die of the coronavirus in India, how many people die of the coronavirus in Brazil, as opposed to other causes of medical deaths. We don't know, we just don't know. I suspect that the numbers are much higher than the official numbers are today in those countries. As for the United States, with 50,000+ deaths out of, number one, I still believe that China has probably a much higher rate of deaths and sick people than it lets know. Much more, which have not been reported for many reasons. Some, again, and other countries also. So the numbers, the total number of 250,000
talking about the post-virus world, which all stuff we knew already, pretty much. Somebody just asked, how can we have so many more cases than India and the countries who have, because they're not doing testing and we don't have any idea how many cases.
I'm trying to, I muted you, but I'm still hearing some. Anyway, so any comparison with the number of deaths in the United States
So they're going to
seems to
start
me
opening up some of New York, May 15th.
a bit artificial. We don't know how many deaths. We know how many deaths we have in the United States, which is 50,000, 50,000+, compared to a total population of 320 million. To say that it's about 27% of the global deaths toll, I'm not that sure. I think the percentage is much lower because other countries have not been as accurate in the number of deaths as the United States. So we'll have to wait a little longer to see the real impact when all this is over. And from Ron, given that the recent enactment of stimulus plans that will leave the US with a national debt in the neighborhood of $25 trillion and annual interest payments of 20 to 25% cents per dollar out of the next budget, do you think the US will be able to play a meaningful role in helping address international economic and financial problems, as well as domestic ones? Well, the debt will be, for sure, is huge. Can we foresee some tax increases in the next budgets? Probably. If not this year and not next year, the years after, because somehow this deficit will have to be taken care of. Playing a meaningful role in helping address international economic and financial problems, I don't think that was the intention of the US administration even before the outbreak. So no, I don't believe that it will play a leading role. It will play a role in international, in dealing with international economic and financial problems, because it's a country that trades freely with the outside world. To play a leading role, I doubt it, not for now. And not only because of the national debt, but also because of the conviction of the administration that the US does not have to play a leading role in that area. And it will only deal again on a transactional basis with other countries. So the debt is huge, but hopefully, again, the economy will rebound because after all, it was doing extremely well before this happened. And we'll see. We'll see. That's the only thing that I can affirm with certainty. All right, I think that we have run out of questions, and probably you have run out of patience also. It's been 2 hours. So we'll have a, thank you, Susan. We'll have, I take it for myself, it was addressed to everybody from Susan. Thank you to all. I thank you because I see it on my screen. So I'll see you all next week. Keep safe. And hopefully next week we'll have maybe better news as far as this virus is concerned. So I see you all next week, and again, be safe. Thank you.